Thank you so much for coming. My name is Jen Paulzine, and it is my privilege to get to be part of Tubman as the CEO, and I'm delighted to welcome you here to the Tubman Chrysalis Center. Before I call up the next round of people, I just want to say again how important it is that we have opportunities like this to come together as people who are really concerned about the issues that we serve, right? And want to tell you just a little bit about Tubman. There is some material in the back for you as well. We are an organization that serves people who are experiencing relationship violence, trafficking, mental and chemical health crises, homelessness. Really the through line is trauma, and we do that through shelter and safe housing and lots of legal services, legal advocacy and representation, and mental and chemical health services. Also lots of youth programs, everything from prevention all the way through to intervention, youth mentorship, and even some diversion work with justice involved youth, and also up to leadership development opportunities for folks, and then all the wraparound stuff that one might expect, right? Support groups and workshops and economic advancement and safety planning and all of those things. And it's just really wonderful to be here with all of you that care so much about this issue and that are really taking action and here for this important conversation. So thank you. We're delighted to host you here. Know that you are welcome anytime as a community member, as a partner organization, as a neighbor. So come on and join us anytime. It is my great joy to ask representatives of our statewide coalitions to step forward, and you're going to be hearing from them next. And I will ask them to introduce themselves so they can do themselves more justice than I can. Thanks, Kate.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kate Hanaher. I'm the staff attorney at the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault. I want to thank the County Attorney's Office for inviting us. I also want to acknowledge that several of our sister coalitions aren't here this evening, but very much are monitoring this work, paying attention, and have a lot of really wonderful member programs that do great work in Hennepin County. MINCASA, the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, is the statewide coalition working to end sexual violence across Minnesota. We do that through education, advocacy, prevention, and partnerships throughout the community. And what I want to focus on this evening is how many really stellar visionary programs we have as our members in Hennepin County. So if there are any member programs of MINCASA in the room, if you want to raise a hand, I'll give you a shout out. There's a tremendous need in the county for victim services. There's a tremendous need across the state for victim services. We are headed into a legislative session where, as sister coalitions, all of us will be asking for $40 million in the supplemental budget bill for victim services. If anybody wants to know more about that, shout to me. Yeah. Or any of my fellow coalition members. And with that, I will introduce Marsha Milliken, who is also here with us.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Marsha Milliken. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Children's Alliance. We are a statewide coalition of children's advocacy centers and multidisciplinary teams throughout the state. And what we focus on is helping to coordinate the investigation, the prosecution, and the healing services for kids who've been abused and their non-offending caregivers. We have 13 child advocacy centers to serve the entire state. And so one of our goals is to continue growing child advocacy centers so kids don't have to travel 2 or 3 hours to receive our services. And so we are really hoping for this $40 million ask because it will really make a difference for the kids in Minnesota. And with that, Bobby. Thanks.
You realize how long you've been doing this work when you come to these and you see people that Lisa came up and she said, it's been years. And I'm like, it has been years. But I'm Bobby Holberg, and I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Alliance on Crime, otherwise known as MAC. We are the General Crime Coalition in the state of Minnesota, and what that means is we tend to focus our efforts on crimes other than domestic violence and sexual assault, although I don't know that I've ever met a victim of domestic violence or sexual assault who also wasn't experiencing general crime. There's a big intersection. So our memberships also intersect. We have about 100 programs statewide. About 75% of our member programs are prosecutorial-based victim witness programs. So Hennepin County is a member program of ours. And then we have community members, community program members. So Cornerstone and Crew Clinic. I've seen some of our members here. But we really strive to support those who are on the front lines supporting victims. And we do a lot of training. And we also engage in a lot of public policy work along with our relative coalitions. So now I have to get to the important stuff that I had to write down. So I just want to thank you for coming out tonight. We appreciate everyone who works to meet the needs of victims of crime and for taking the time to come out to this evening to hear from those who lead the statewide victim service coalitions and those with direct experience who will be speaking on the upcoming panel. And Mary Moriarty, the Hennepin County Attorney. I'm honored to introduce her tonight. As we all work to improve outcomes for crime victims and survivors and improve the ways in which the criminal justice system serves and supports those who are most deeply impacted by crime and trauma, I hope we all recognize how important it is that we have these conversations with our partners about where we're at and where we need to go. So when Mary asked the coalitions to partner on this summit, I think we all appreciated an opportunity to come together with our criminal justice partners in Hennepin County and have that honest conversation about the evolution of our relationship. For that reason, we want to commend Mary's office for reaching out repeatedly. Jamel has taken over my inbox. To partner with us, learn from us, and listen to us as we look to elevate this profession and better serve those who need our support. Specifically, I want to highlight that during last year's legislative session, Mary was the only county attorney to offer her support for the coalition's joint funding request. This year, her office again is making our request for a $40 million increase to base funding for crime victim services, one of her top legislative priorities, and is helping to support us by hosting events like this and inviting press and policymakers to help us raise awareness of the critical resources we know crime victim services need. For that, we are all so thankful. Get ready to see and hear the coalitions and our member programs repeating. Investing in services and support for victims of crime equals safer communities. #40 million. Ultimately, hosting and participating in events like today's will help us shape the sometimes misguided public perceptions around victims and survivors and build awareness of the importance of the work we do through our advocacy. For that reason, on behalf of MAC and our relative coalitions, I want to say how grateful we are to co-host this event with our next speaker, Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty.
Thank you for all coming out. This is really exciting for me, and I do want to mention again, we have plenty of food, so please go back and pick up something. Also remember, you have cards here, so if you have questions, make sure you fill those out. Why is this so important to me? It's important to me because I've been in the system for over 30 years, in the Hennepin County system. And what I've often seen is people who've been harmed, victims, survivors, talked about as though they were a monolith. That they all wanted the same thing. And experiencing that the system, the legal system, criminal legal system, wasn't really designed to really actually listen to people who've been harmed. And really actually try to help people who've been harmed be in a position where they can move forward, recover from their trauma, where they don't hurt other people. Because one thing I learned as a public defender for almost 30 years is when I represented people who had harmed somebody else and I did a social history, they had so often been harmed themselves. They had been the victims of crime. And I often asked myself or told myself, had we intervened in an effective way early on when they were a child and they were the victim of some kind of sexual abuse or violence, that person probably would not have lashed out and hurt somebody else. The other thing that's been really important to me in my campaign when I was running, I was able to talk to a woman who was carjacked. And this was an incredibly traumatic experience for her, that she described it to me. She had pulled into her garage with her kids. Somebody came and put a gun to her head and to her purse and that kind of thing. And one of the things she said to me was that she was struck by how young the people who harmed her looked. Like they were juveniles, they were really young. And as she thought about it, she thought, you know, I don't think I want to be responsible for those youth to go to prison. I want them to get help so that they don't harm anyone else in the future. And she told me about the fact that she had done an interview on one of our local stations. And she had talked about that in the interview, about what she wanted. And she told me that not too long after that, she happened upon a Facebook page that was vilifying her for her position about what she wanted as a person who had been harmed. Because it didn't fit with this stereotype that people hold of victims, that to be a true victim, you must want somebody to go to prison for a long period of time, or you must want this, that, or the other thing. Really disrespecting and not honoring what a person who's been harmed actually wants. And having said that, I know, because I talk to victims, I talk to families a lot, there are certainly people who've been harmed who want the person who harmed them to go to prison. And sometimes people need to go to prison because they aren't safe in the community. But we don't necessarily do a good job of listening to somebody who's been harmed and really trying to provide them the resources that helps them really move towards recovery. And one of the most compelling experiences I've had as a prosecutor, actually, I was in Alabama with a group of prosecutors, and I was able to listen to some men, mostly men actually, who had gone to prison as boys pretty much. And they were out of prison and they had spent decades in prison, and they were talking about how the things that they had done and how they had changed since they were boys, and how they wanted people to know that what they had done didn't define them. But the most interesting speaker that I heard was the mom of a 3-year-old boy. She, and this didn't happen here, she was driving her car and somebody fired shots that happened to hit her car and her 3-year-old boy. And she was holding her 3-year-old boy when he bled to death. He died. And she recounted this story of how the police told her, even before they knew who did it, we will find out who did it and we will get justice for you. We will send these people to prison for the rest of their lives. And she talked about how she wasn't sure that's what she really wanted. She just wasn't sure at that point. And she said to herself, she was describing this, that she felt that even before she knew who had done this, that she personally wanted to forgive them. Because she didn't want to be in a space where she held anger and bitterness towards whoever it was, because that wasn't how she could move forward. And that was her, and she was very clear about saying, this is me, I'm not saying that should be anybody else. But the interesting thing about this story is that they did find out who did this, and one of the people was I think a 15-year-old boy, and he did go to prison for a long period of time. But he wanted her to know that he was sorry for what he had done. But as many of you know, he was not allowed to contact her, because when you go to prison, you're not allowed to contact the person that you harmed. That ends up being a terrible situation where people who have been harmed never get to hear about the fact that the person who harmed them actually is sorry. But the interesting thing about this is he wrote a bunch of letters and he sent them everywhere that he could think of, churches. One of them got back to her. And long story short, they ended up meeting, they ended up developing a relationship, and she had adopted him essentially, and he was there at this conference as well. And so they told their story together. And when she told her story about her 3-year-old boy who had died, the young man, now not so young man, because he spent a lot of time in prison, who had done it, was tearful and very emotional. But she said something to all of us prosecutors that I'll never forget. She said, when you talk to those of us who have been harmed, who are victims, ask yourself why you're telling us the things you're telling us. Are you telling us we're going to get justice? Are you promising us that we're going to get justice, and justice looks like sending somebody to prison for a long period of time because you are telling us that's how we're going to heal? Because I can tell you that's not how it works. So she said to us, you all need to look in the mirror and you need to think about why you are asking for what you're asking for, and don't pretend it's necessarily on behalf of me and other people who've been harmed. And I think that kind of goes into my experience in the criminal legal system, really not listening to people and really, in some sense, using victims as a, kind of a, we send people to prison for a long time because that's what victims want. That's what victims should want. And if they tell us that's not what they want, we disregard that. And so one of the things that I've seen too in this job so far is, and this is true of criminal vehicular homicides. We have a bunch of criminal vehicular homicides where somebody gets into a car, they're distracted, they're drinking, something like that, and in a second they blow through a stop sign and they kill someone. And what I've noticed about that, and what I've noticed about pretty much every other crime of violence, we do not do a good job of helping people who've been harmed to get restorative justice, to really get down on that path of being restored and getting the answers to questions almost all of them want. Why did you do this? Do you think about what you did to me? Do you think about how you've deprived me of my son, my husband? Like, do you care about that? And in court, our traditional system really doesn't allow for that. It actually doesn't allow the person who's done the harm to apologize and do the apology, to repair what they have done. And it doesn't allow the person who's been harmed to get any kind of meaningful answers to questions or path to recovery. And I think that that's really missing. And one of the things we're doing in our office is this next year, we're really going to be building out our ability to do restorative practices, because I think that's critically important for people who want to learn about and get those questions answered and really start down a path where they can get some kind of closure. Because it's been my experience over the decades that when people come to court, and I've experienced this many times, I've been sitting in court, I've seen somebody who's been harmed come into court and they give a victim impact statement, and it often has lots of questions. Why did you do this? Do you know how much you hurt me? And then the person is sentenced, they go away to prison, and then I see victims' families standing there kind of like, is this it? Is this it? We as a system have to do better. And I want to do better. And to do better, that means as prosecutors, we have to have some humility and say, we all need to start listening. We need to start listening to you, people with lived experience, people who work with people who've been harmed. What can we do? And it can't be one size fits all, because people who've been harmed want different things. But we have to start listening. We have to start working with you on these things that will provide direct services, which is one of the reasons why I supported and I testified on behalf of the bill, and I will be doing that again, because it's so important to get services to people. About 2 months ago, I talked to family of somebody who was shot and killed. And the mother of the wife of the person who was killed was talking about her toddler who lost his dad. And she was showing me a picture of the fact that her husband was in the hospital and her baby was sitting on his daddy's leg. And his daddy didn't wake up and never woke up. And she was talking about, because of what happened, that violence, her son had a much higher probability of being involved in the court system. And I remember thinking, we have to prevent that. We have to wrap services around that boy. We have to do something to make sure that that doesn't happen, and we don't do it. So I'm hoping that this is kind of the beginning of that conversation, an ongoing conversation about how we can do better. And that really is about listening and learning, and really deciding that we need to do better and we are going to do better. So I'm gonna invite Glenn Burke to come up, and he's gonna talk. He's the head of our Victim Witness Services, and he's gonna talk to you a little bit about what we do.
Thank you, Mary. Good evening, everybody. Just want to say, first of all, thank you all for being here. I truly appreciate your presence, and like Mary, I welcome the beginning of this relationship. This is what this is the start of. We are thinking about how we can help victims in a much different way, and I believe it starts here in these type of spaces, and we all can we all have our lived experiences, and we can all sort of start to think in a different way, reimagine how we can help those who've been harmed, to try to, as best we can, holistically make them whole. And with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about my division, and here we go. Sorry. Whoops. Oh, so overview. Our areas of responsibility for victim witness, I break them down into 4 different places. Our adult prosecution division, our youth prosecution division, the domestic abuse service center, and our community prosecution division. It's sort of how we break down how we look at cases as they come in overall from a prosecutorial standpoint. With the with domestic abuse service center, they help victims who come in. We work with whomever, those who've been harmed in a romantic or family relationship, and try to get them services as quick and as fast as we can. In a breakdown of our staff, 56 total staff. Those are case management assistants, CMAs. I know many of you have worked with them, and legal service specialists, LSSs. 56 total staff. We're the most diverse division within the office. So pretty proud of. 87.5% women, 12.5% men, with 56% people of color, 38% white, 5.5% basically not specified. We also have a lot of bilingual speakers, as you can see, Spanish, Hmong, Somali, Nepali, Hindi, Arabic, Telugu, Tamil, Nuari, and Sanskrit. We are trying to be available and ready for community, and we just had a meeting today where it's talking about there are a few emerging languages and people who've come here from Ecuador who speak an indigenous language. And I want to say, I hope I'm saying this right, Keskrit. And I've only found one organization that has a speaker who can translate. But obviously, trying to think ahead and be more forward thinking. We know new arrivals often become victims of crime, and I want to be there and be ready to service them, unfortunately, if that happens in our county. So we're already talking about how we can be ready for that. Next, here are some of the duties that we have in the criminal divisions. We assist and support victims, survivors, and witnesses of felony level and all of juvenile crimes and cases as they navigate the Hennepin County court system. That's a lot of cases. Each case is assigned an advocate who informs the victims of their rights under the Minnesota Crime Victims Bill of Rights, notify victim survivors of hearing dates, times, and locations, keep victim survivors updated on case status from charging decision through the appeal process, and that can be a very long time. Some cases literally take years. And I know that when I started with the division, I received 4 calls from families who told me I better take care of their advocate. And what was funny about that was those cases all were over 10 years old. They just heard that somebody new was in the chair, and they called me directly and said, "You better take care of our advocate. They are family to me." And I said, yes, ma'am, yes, sir. I will do my best. And it was wonderful for me to hear that as a new manager, because what that meant was my advocates were making true relationships. They were there for those folks. They became part of their family. They were people that they thought of all the time, that helped them through. And you can't put a price on that. And from a leadership standpoint, it made me feel good. I have a wonderful staff. They do the work, and they are the feelers in the office. They feel everything, and that is part of their passion and what they exude. To keep going, they assist victim survivors with filing for financial assistance with the Crime Victims Reimbursement Program and or through restitution. They assist with transportation travel arrangements for out-of-town victims and witnesses, including the expert witnesses. Sometimes you have to get professionals, doctors, other folks to come in and testify. And that is a lot of wrangling to do to get a lot of schedules to fit for court, because court dates can move. They aid victims as they participate in the criminal justice process and enable them to exercise their rights as crime victim survivors. Mary spoke about that a little bit with trying to help them at the end of court give a victim impact statement. For a lot of folks, this is the end of the road within our system. And if there's a sense of finality to it that's very hard to deal with. As Mary said, sometimes you see families who, after it's over, they don't know what else, because they've lived day to day to get to that point, and it's hard when it's over. And sometimes that victim impact statement is their last chance to sort of say what they need to say and get it all out. And we are trying to work on helping them beyond that. They assist with the return of property and assist with the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, SAKI grant, and the OJP African American grant supporting victim advocacy. Those are 2 somewhat specialty units. Years ago, the Minneapolis Police Department had a surplus of sex assault kits that were not tested or sent to the BCA. And the county was fortunate enough to be able to get a grant to help us process all those. And we've supported that and try to help those victims get some holistic healing and sense of justice. And the African American grant, it supports victim advocacy for a community that honestly overrepresented in the system, but those victims also needed sometimes they need some help from someone who looks like them. And that was really important with that grant. Those ladies do an incredible job of doing that and meeting people where they're at, no matter what. And so we support that. The division overall assisted on 5,630 newly charged cases in 2022. It's a lot of cases, and the thing is, those are the charged cases. Those aren't the ones that are still under investigation. So staff is busy. I have some staff here. I know their caseloads. They are busy every day. The Domestic Abuse Service Center, which is in sort of the basement in between the county and the city buildings, serves people who are victims of violence caused by a family or household member or romantic member. This includes anyone who has been a victim of actual or threatened violence by a person with whom they have had a romantic or sexual relationship, or people who live together. Oh, excuse me. What happened? Oh, hit the wrong button. Sorry. Multiple service such as advocacy, filing orders for protection, or connecting with the prosecution team and seeking legal consultation and representation from pro bono attorneys are in one centralized location, which is really important. It's nice to have one place for people to go, not getting sent around. And also, because of COVID and the pandemic, what they started doing was offering online services, which was a boom during that time frame when, unfortunately, a lot of people, were stuck together who could not reach out for help in any other way. So that was a great innovation the team put in place. In 2022, DASC had a total of 23,783 total contacts, consisting of advocacy contacts, crisis calls, court advocacy, and gone on arrival cases. And for those who don't know, gone on arrival cases are incidents of reported domestic assault where the potential suspect or offender was not there when the police showed up. So they honestly don't get a lot of service from law enforcement. But we try to follow up on it to offer services to help them start their journey to get out of bad relationships. DASC advocates assisted with submitting 2,630 orders for protection cases to district court, and they are responsible for filing 80% of all orders for protection in Hennepin County. They are working very hard to try to help the system help those who've been harmed or are in bad situations. Last but not least, we also work on U and T visas for non-citizen victims. A U visa, a T visa are a type of visa for those who may not be citizens who are affected by crime. In a lot of cases, that can be physical violence, or it could also be withholding of, wages, fees, things like that. It's for victims of crimes who are helpful in investigation or prosecution. Helpful doesn't necessarily mean that they testify. It might mean that they call 911. Because unfortunately for a lot of our community, and we learned this during the last presidential administration, a lot of our immigrant communities quit calling the police because of the threat of deportation. And we have the statistics that show that, and they were still being harmed. Nobody knew, and that's a shame. Our committee includes attorneys, culturally specific advocates, and an administrative assistant, and we have a new UNT visa policy. We will inform victims of their rights to request a UNT visa certification at the beginning. As soon as we come in contact, we are letting them know they can be eligible for this. Just to let them know as part of their rights, so that it used to be that you wait to the end, and it doesn't always take that, because sometimes the courage is in coming forward, not getting through the end of the case because we don't know how the cases are going to resolve. We will certify regardless of the case outcome or the victim's criminal history. We will process U visa certifications within 30 days or 7 days if the victim is in removal proceedings. And we continue to communicate with victims in their preferred language. That's why I said we are trying our best to add more languages to our repertoire. And if you have questions, we're pretty proud. We got a new email address, visa@hennepin.us. And the reason for that was because in almost all languages, visa is the same word. It means the same thing. And so for many of our new arrival or newly arrived communities, it's nice to just say visa@Hennepin. It kind of standard in every language. So the team is really happy with that. So am I. But that's my overview. Thank you so much. Once again, my name is Glenn Berg. Here's my contact information if anybody has any questions or comments. And thank you again so much for being here. With that, can I ask the panel to please come up? Mary, Jessica, Antonio, Artika, and Julie.
Can you go back to your contact?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
while people are on their way up, when Glenn was talking about our U visa being new, I just approved that today. And I want to tell you how different it is. In the past, if somebody started talking about potential immigration consequences, we would shut that down. People didn't really want to know. So we have changed that. We are going to proactively suggest that to people, help people. We're going to work with our lawyers to understand how to deal with that in litigation. So it's a brand new policy, and I think it's going to serve victims much better. We are also expanding our worker protection abilities, and this will help with that as well. I don't need my face to be up here.
I just decided. Sit.
Okay, thank you, panel. Why don't we go down the line, and if you could introduce yourself. Why don't we start with Julie on the end there?
I am Julie Risser, and I'm excuse me? My name is Julie Risser, and I'm here as a victim of on-the-job sexual harassment. I was fortunate to have support from WICASA, and it is wonderful to be next to Artika. The last time we were together, I think we were testifying at the Senate. So on a bill that passed, and hopefully will make a big difference. So good to be here.
Hi, good evening. My name is Artika Roller. Thanks, Jen, for hosting us at Tubman, and for Mary and your team for inviting me to speak this evening. I am the executive director of Cornerstone Advocacy Services. I've been there for probably almost 60 days, so I'm a newbie. But was part of, or the executive director of the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and also want to thank the coalitions for coming in their advocacy around this work as well.
My name is Antonio Williams. I'm the founder and co-executive director of Tone Up. It's an organization that helps formerly incarcerated community members find their way back into their community in a dignified way. I'm also a member of the Restore the Vote Coalition, a law that restored the right to vote to over 55,000 Minnesotans who once couldn't vote due to probation or parole.
Which also, there was a lawsuit filed. You want to mention that today?
A lawsuit was filed challenging it bogusly, and today it was defeated. Our Attorney General justice prevails again. And I do have to name this. One of our brothers, Marvin Haynes, was also released this week. This is a juvenile who was sentenced wrongfully. He came home.
I am Jessica Immerman. I'm a victim advocate at the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. I have been there 24 years. I've worked in both juvenile and adult prosecution in multiple roles.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Artika, I'm going to start with you, since you've been in your new role for 60 days. But
Almost, not quite.
Yeah, okay. So can you talk to us about what has changed about the way victim witnesses are treated by the criminal legal system over the time you've done all of your work?
Yeah, so I think I've been in the movement for nearly 20 years now. And Mary, it feels like you were in my notes this evening, so I'll try not to repeat some of the things that you talked about, but what has changed is really the understanding of complex trauma from the prosecution side. I remember working with a young woman, and we were going over her deposition, which was about 300 pages. And she started getting very anxious about what was going on, what was said. It was a long process. And I remember at that time, it was a while ago, the victim advocate said, you know, if you don't do this, if you don't show up, you could be subpoenaed, and if you don't show up for your subpoena, you may be arrested. And this was the victim, and she was a young victim at that time. I don't believe that would happen now. I believe that the office has done its work and understands trauma in a better way. That behavioral responses may show up in different ways for victims and survivors. It may be anger, it may be depression, they may freeze and kind of withdraw. And so I think that your team is aware of that and understand that their behavioral response is not an unwillingness to participate, it is a trauma response. The other thing that you did highlight is restorative justice and really exploring that, because some folks want some type of accountability, but may not want to go through the legal process of getting that type of accountability. So that we're even talking about restorative justice in that way for especially victims and survivors of things of sexual assault. Those, like 3% people report those cases, and if we can give them some alternatives through different channels of healing and restoration, I think that that's something that I hear your office talking about and working through. So those are just a few things that I'll highlight right now.
Jessica, you've been with the office for quite a few years. Can you talk about how the approach has changed over the years?
I will say it's ebbed and flowed a lot over the years, with different resources being available, funding. But I will say the historical arresting or threatening to arrest victims is definitely not something that we do anymore. So I think that is a step in the right direction, and hearing victims, understanding where they're coming from, having our attorneys hear that, be part of that discussion and that process, making decisions with that in mind is, I think, where we're at now versus just a little bit less cookie cutter.
So, Julie, can you talk about how the criminal legal process, the system, can sometimes further re-victimize people?
I can. In 2014, that was when I reached a civil settlement with my former employer, but I tried really hard to get criminal action going. And I think my frustration is that we tend to view things in a very binary kind of way. And if it's something that happens within the workplace, it ends up being categorized as a civil matter. But the reality is the need to be employed, to have that income, that health care, all of that is so critical to individual well-being and family well-being, and it is complex. And the infrastructure that shores up that sexual harassment, sexual abuse that happens in the workplace is really intertwined. And some of the elements I think can be categorized as civil, some as criminal. And so when I got my payment, it was given to me as wages, not, and so that was really very frustrating. And I tried to get response on that, and I was not heard at all. But the reality is it's complicated, because if you're paying it that way, that means the employer is probably not reporting the payment to their insurers. The employer is probably not taking measures, if it happened after 2017, to meet federal guidelines and not have the employee pay taxes on that. And so I think there's a lot going on, and listening, and I was so happy to hear listening is so critical, but going down the path with that victim and really exploring the possibility that, hey, this might not just be a civil case. There's probably elements in here that are criminal. And I think that is something that we still need to work on.
Antonio, can you tell us about your story?
Yeah. So I guess my first interaction with the criminal justice system and harm, I've been rethinking about it a lot. It wasn't in my teenage years. It was actually when my parents got introduced to the system. When my parents were introduced to the system when I was a kid, that brought me to the foster care system. I was a ward of the state longer than I can remember. I lived in over 30 different homes before I was 13 years old. I was put in plastic handcuffs at 6 years old for fighting a white kid. He was okay. I was taken out in handcuffs, the plastic zip tie ones, here in Minnesota. So that was my introduction to the system. I believe I started framing it, different when I thought about how the system's ripple effects, impact more than just the person, right? We tend to think, again, the binary thing, right? We think of it in one way. And when a person who causes harm has kids and they go to prison back and forth and they're using drugs, their kids are harmed. Their kids are scarred. There's trauma so that's where my story started. And then less than 5 years after I got out of the foster care system, the school to prison pipeline system worked its thing on me, and I ended up going to prison after causing harm to some people in my community. And I went to prison for 14 years and 2 weeks. I've been home 3.5 years. And so my transformation started immediately after my experience, my causing the harm and seeing the impact, seeing the effect I had, going through the system and wanting to say how sorry I was, but being coached by my public defender, you stay quiet. When the judge asks you, do you have anything to say, you stay quiet. You don't look towards the victim's family. You don't say anything. And I followed those instructions because I thought that's, 19-year-old kid, I thought that's what and the statement that my victim's father gave was, you showed no remorse, you wouldn't even look at me. And everything is screaming at me like, I was told not to, I wanted to say a whole lot, Fast forward, 9 years into my sentence, I wrote a letter. I wrote the letter 6 years into my sentence, a victim apology letter. It sits in a bank, and I don't know if you know about how that works in prison, but it sits in a bank, and the person will never know that it's there until they ask for it, right? So I wrote this letter, and I'm like, hey, I got this on my heart. And I finally get a response my 9th year in, and I begin the restorative justice process with my victim's father. And it was beyond my imagination. And so it changed my perspective, and it caused me to do my work in a different way. It caused me to think about my role in a much different way. But I think those questions might come a little later. So
Thank you for sharing that. How, and your story does remind me of, I gave a presentation to probation officers once at a conference, and I was looking at the program before I gave my presentation, and they had sessions on how to help kids who were, whose parents, guardians, that kind of thing, were engaged in intimate partner violence. And what struck me about it was most of the people I represented as a public defender who were accused of intimate partner violence had also witnessed it. And so it was fascinating to me that the probation officers were talking about how can we help kids, but then when those kids turn 18, then they become the perpetrator, and we treat them in a very different way. How, and this is a question for anybody, how can we help kids who are in these situations where they're in foster care, they're seeing domestic violence? How do we help them so that they don't in turn harm others? What can we in the system do better? And that's for anybody.
Mary, this probably isn't answering your question, but I want to take note that particularly in the African American community, it's not when they're 18 where they start looking like they are predators. They could be early as 12, when especially young Black men start looking, are viewed as predators instead of children. And in addition, young Black women, I think Harvard did a study that they're adultified even younger at 8 years old. They are looked at as someone that's not in need of care and love. So just want to put it in perspective that it's not that number 18, and specifically for the Black community where we start looking at our youth as predators and no longer children.
Can I add something? It would be inappropriate. I agree with you. In fact, I used to work at the county attorney's office, and I used to head up the juvenile prosecution and victim services, and also work with the gang team. I have many friends who are educators. I have children in my blood. And I say that because I really mean that. Kindergarten teachers can identify the kids who are going to be this, and this, and this, and this. They know at a very young age. And those are the kids we need to reach out. And in terms of services as someone who's 18, it looks very different than reaching those kids. It's much easier to help a broken child, than to fix a broken adult. And that's where we need to be. And looking for juvenile, but juvenile court is where it's at. I mean, many people think, when I was in juvenile, I came from Ramsey County, and I almost felt like I was demoted because I worked on adult cases with children who've been abused by adults. Once I got to Hennepin County Juvenile Court, I realized it is everything. That is where you're going to make substantive changes that actually make a difference. And I'll just say one more thing, I'll promise I'll shut up.
Yeah.
This woman right here is a gem. She truly is. I took on her for the plan. Hired young. I know she is I know what she looks like. And the magic she did on some of our gang cases truly was amazing. And I am honored to be able to say that about her because it was.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you. It does raise an interesting question that, how do we treat youth in the system? And Artika, your point is well taken that we've had this narrative of the super predator, and the way we treat Black youth is very different than the way we treat white youth. So what are some of the ways we can partner to change that narrative? And that's for anybody.
Looking at Tone.
Can you repeat it?
Yeah. I mean, we have this narrative in the community, all across the country, actually, and it's one that we've seen over and over. That we come pretty close to hearing this language about youth here, particularly when we're talking about carjacking and car theft. It's super predator kind of language, and it causes a lot of people to make demands on the system about what we do about those youth, which is usually about punishment. Can you talk about that a little bit? How do we change that narrative?
Well, I think the community is the answer. When we start looking at my kid is your kid, I mean, it's gonna sound cliche, but I'm a community organizer. For a living, I knock doors and I talk to strangers, my community members. Now my Rolodex is crazy, right? But I've seen a change in myself and in my community by doing that. I understand that the only way we, de-boogify each other is by getting to know each other, talking to each other, having real conversations, creating spaces like this. I understand me being here, a person who caused harm around, advocates for people who have been harmed, right? So, but I walk into these spaces because I know it's necessary, right? We need more of that, right? We need more of people being fearless and looking at themselves and saying, hey, am I perpetuating a cycle of harm within my own homes by how I respond to things that happen to me in my workplace, right? In my friend group, right? It starts at that basic level. And I think also when juveniles and kids are causing harm, yes, we know, like the statistics and everything, we know it's because they were harmed themselves, right? It's usually a cry for help. And how is the support from the whole community and the systems in charge of that? Are we going and creating spaces where kids can be kids? Are we creating spaces where kids can process things that they've been through with each other? I say this as a kid who went through that. 30 different homes before you're 13 years old. Imagine the different type of experiences you've had, right? The type of people you've been around, the type of kids, the other kids who you've seen go through way worse things than you did, right? So, like, being able to step outside of our boxes is how we're gonna get outside of this, and there's layers and boxes within those boxes.
Thank you. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about intimate partner violence. Many people don't report that crime. And then sometimes when they do, as Jessica, you know, they often then don't want to go forward to prosecute. What they really want is the violence to stop. But then we as prosecutors can sometimes be in a position where, hey, we feel like we want to prosecute a case. Can you talk about how you've tried to balance the victim's needs and desires with what our prosecutors want to do?
So I think historically it was really a little bit more cookie cutter, like I said, but I think truly listening to those victims, understanding the needs that they have, seeing if there's a way within our confines of the court system that we can meet those needs that are keeping people safe. And I think this actually pivots back to what you said a little bit, is we're constantly ordering offenders to go to DV programming, but we're not addressing the victims and we're not addressing the children that are witnessing those things. So we're only addressing one part of it. And it's so utopian of me to want, because how do you order somebody who's not ordered to do something to participate? But so much benefit could happen from more wraparound services to help break those cycles, help children process what they've been through, help victims process what they've been through, so everybody can heal more wholly. And
yeah, and thank you. I don't think that that's utopian to want a system where we do consider the family as a whole. Because we know many people in those relationships want to continue those relationships, and we are not going to end that.
True, it's utopian not wanting it, but trying to make it happen, I think.
No,
and
I
like, how do
too.
you make that happen?
And maybe, Artika, can you talk about that? Is it so utopian to want other options for people who are the victims of intimate partner violence, who want that relationship to be maintained?
No, I think that that's the reality. And we also know that sometimes it takes up to 7 times for that person to leave that relationship. We also know that that's the most violent time. So it may be that the person is thinking about leaving, but the risk for the children and themselves is high at that time. I think it's important for us to consider that what a victim needs may change over the spectrum of that interaction with them. There might be an immediate need for safety and resources, and after, there might be immediate need for repairing like a broken window or something like that. And as that case goes on, there is more of a need for advocacy and resources around how do I navigate this large system? How do I show up to court? And so we have to realize that the needs of victims will change over time. And just because that first interaction, they're not considering ending or leaving that relationship, it doesn't mean that that's not going to happen by the time we end this process. And what are the resources we're giving them? And we really have to let victims decide what is best for them. Although we may think, hey, you need to leave that person. is complicated. And there might be some community aspects, some financial aspects of why they're not leaving. There's many reasons why people don't leave right away, but there are resources, and we have Tubman here, myself, and Cornerstone as well. And so it would be important to give a victim and survivor that resource, like not pushing them into making a decision, but hey, here's someone who can walk you through this process, or if you need anything. You might not need something right now, but if you need anything in the future, here's an organization that can help.
I want to follow up on that, but if you have questions, could you please, we'll have somebody collect them, because we want to leave time for your questions. While you're doing that, I want to follow up a little bit. I think of a couple of cases where it was very difficult to get the victim to cooperate. In fact, I mean, she was just in a place where she didn't feel that she could or didn't want to. And she lost her life. I'm thinking of a particular case. And family, community, like a lot of friends and family were about, the system failed her. What do we do in situations like that where we've got somebody clearly in an abusive relationship, but who isn't at that place where they feel they can or they want to leave?
Yeah, and again, connect with services if at all possible. And in addition to that, I think about community and family wanting specific things that systems can't provide, but I also think that systems have to admit when they did mess up and that we didn't show up and we didn't get the services or the response that happened. So it's important for us to admit when things go wrong, but it's important for us to also do that education with community and family, like here are the things that we're trying to work through and grieve with them. Because not only is it hard for that family, it's also hard for us when we lose people that we're working with as well.
I don't know if there are any questions out there. I'll just keep asking questions. So what can we do in Hennepin County Attorney's Office, or what can we advocate for that can help people who've been harmed of any kind? And this is for the panel, the entire panel.
Well, I think, I think we need to do a better job at figuring out ways to bridge the gap between, perpetrator and, victim. I think what's either a myth or just an unknown fact about people who have caused harm and are, living with that is that we're not deeply remorseful, many of us, and that we want an opportunity to do something. And sometimes we don't feel like there's access to that from the state and from even, local community organizations. And so this is also an invitation. Tone Up, my organization, is willing to sit down, willing to create, willing to think about what those things look like, because it is crucial to us breaking the ceiling, getting into the next step to where we're catching the end of it. Like, people are gonna cause harm. We're not gonna be able to create a system where harm is not gonna be caused, right? People are gonna cause harm. So we need to figure out how are we bridging the divide and the gap. So I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if it looks like a relations board, a space where all stakeholders come together and are able to have a safe space where we're represented, all of our issues and interests maybe, but I think that's a great place to start.
Tony and I had the opportunity to spend some time in DC together and talking about prosecution accountability tables. And I think that that's a way for us to come together to talk about practice and policy. Also, I know that MNCASA does a lot of work around protocol development, response to victims and survivors. Our SMART teams, SART teams as well. And so I think that those are places, some of the challenges around that is that sometimes our system folks show up in those spaces not as collaborative as we need them to be in those spaces. And so I think that if we're really going to do the work and have people sit around the table and work on positive solutions for our community, that we need all partners to come into those spaces, understanding that there's equity around the table, and that we're really there to work on solutions and not push system agendas. One of the complicated things around that is that sometimes we come up with results that make the system work better, but it's not centered in what the needs of victims and survivors are. And I know that in your speech, you talked about that a little bit.
I
Yeah.
did, and
Yeah.
if I could talk about the collaboration, I think what I hear you saying, because I've seen this, sometimes Hennepin County tends to have ideas, just the county in general, about what the solution is and show up in community and want community to rubber stamp it rather than being a true partner in creating a solution.
Yes, I would say that is true, even when community repeatedly says, don't do that. Hennepin County continues to do the same thing.
I have a bunch of questions here. I will launch into them. How many sexual assault cases did your office either decline to charge or dismiss after charging in the last year? I'm saying this, I picked this question. I don't have the number, but I do get data. And I look at the data a lot. And we are in the process of changing the way, so our adult prosecution division, which prosecutes all of our non-property and drug cases, we are about to reimagine that division, and we're thinking about ways of making us much more effective, particularly in the area of sexual assault. When I look at the data about sexual assault cases, it's very low. The cases we actually receive, I think it was something like 200, like between 200 and 300 in the entire county, which I thought was some kind of wrong data because I couldn't believe it was that low. And so I met with some of our people who do sexual assaults, and we were trying to figure out what is going on here. And some of it has to do with how cases are investigated. In other words, if there's not really good investigation and forensic collecting of evidence, those cases aren't going to get forwarded to us. And so we're thinking about ways of working with law enforcement, perhaps embedding some of our prosecutors to really be partnering with law enforcement to talk to them about how to investigate cases and suggest to them that they can handle or do certain interviews and follow up. So I am concerned about the really few cases that we end up charging, and it's because by and large we don't get a lot of cases. And some of that I think too is, I think about somebody who's had that horrible traumatic experience, and the question is, would you want to put yourself through what the court system offers? And I think we have a long way to go there in terms of building trusting relationships that may be, we understand if you don't want to go through this process. And one thing I've been talking to some commissioners about is trying to create some services in Hennepin County that would be mental health services, therapy, that kind of thing, for people who may come to us but may not want to go through with prosecution, or maybe people go through that door and maybe they do want prosecution. So this is an area we need a lot of work on, and I know that doesn't entirely answer your question, except to say that we are working on this.
Mary, can I comment
Yes.
a little bit? Thank you, I appreciate you talking about the alternatives. But the frustration for us in the movement is that your response to why cases aren't being charged out are the same responses that I've been hearing for the last 20 years, and anybody who's been in the movement have been hearing those same answers for the last 30 or 40 years. And so I'm glad that you're taking a look at it, but it feels like we're kind of stuck like in 1956. Instead of in 2023 and almost 2024. So I just want to acknowledge that. I'm glad that you're working on it, but over and over and over again, we just continue to hear that is the reason why cases aren't moving forward, even understanding that there's some people who don't want the legal system, but if we're advocating, telling people, tell,
Right.
and there will be help and services and a legal response, and that's just not happening repeatedly, we just need to somehow move the needle in that direction, and that would be the request.
Do you think that maybe the flavor of the day actually comes into play as well? Back when we talked about the SARS kits not being investigated and being stored incorrectly, there was this big, huge push to get more cases through, and that kind of goes away because something else takes the front headlines. And I agree with you. I mean, I was an SOS volunteer back when I was like.
So can I jump in, because we do have a lot of
Oh, sure.
questions, and I wanted to follow up on that. So my philosophy, when I came in, one of the things I heard, particularly, let me give you an example. On an issue called Brady, I came into the office and I was familiar with a little bit with the relationships that my office had with police, right? But when I came in, I found some surprises there. One of them was that because we're not the employer of the police, we had a very separate, hey, that's police procedure. That doesn't have anything to do with us. I have a very different view of our relationship with police and frankly, all justice partners. I have met with suburban police chiefs every month. I meet with them 4 times a month in small groups to talk about how we can partner together. And I've been very clear and candid that I want to work with them about how we all do better at getting cases for prosecution. So that means sexual assault. So what I am interested in doing is helping, nudging, encouraging, using every lever we have to encourage and help law enforcement to do a better job at investigating cases. I am also interested in putting our staff in a position where they can do better at handling these types of cases, which is why we're thinking about reorganization. So I hear you loud and clear that we've all been hearing this forever, but we have some different approaches here, and my expectation is that we will not just maintain the status quo. We have a murder case right now where we've been checking in every once in a while and things aren't happening the way we would like them to happen, and we've assigned a prosecutor specifically on that case to work with the police department about what they need to do to be able to bring us a case. So I view it as a partnership where we nudge and use levers and we work together to make people safer. So it's not gonna be okay that, we just can't do it.
I appreciate that, Mary. And real quickly, for us, it's not the flavor of the day. It's always, or we feel that it's always sexual assaults, investigations, or responses get cut. That's the first cut that happens when we're looking at those cases.
How have relationships between victim witness advocates and community advocates changed?
I would hope that they're getting better. I think we each play a very specific role in helping victims through their trauma. And moving more towards collaboration with each other can only benefit the people that we're serving. I think reaching out to our partners in the community to help with the OFPs, Safe at Home, the resources that we can't provide. I will use this as an example. One of the advocates here today accompanied a victim through an entire trial recently. It was what that victim needed, and it worked well. We had our staff there, but she needed her community advocate. She was there every step, every moment, many moments, and I think that worked so well. And to build on that and continue that partnership will hopefully be the way we can move forward.
And I think events like this, because I'm assuming that this question is based on practices that people want to see improved. But I think events like this and partnership and listening is how we learn how we can do better and how we can work better with community partners and how community partners can work better with us. So that'll be ongoing conversation. What is the Hennepin County Attorney's process to inform victims that their case is being declined for prosecution? That's an interesting one because I heard a lot about that in my campaign. I heard a lot about lack of communication. And one of the things that we've been working on is communication by our lawyers with victims, with police officers. We have I've heard a lot of feedback from police officers about, well, why have you declined this case I sent you? I'm not hearing a really adequate explanation. In fact, I had a conversation with a police chief today who wanted an explanation for why we declined a case, and he wanted to speak to me, which was fine. So I had that conversation with him and I explained. But I think we can do better on this front. I do think one of the issues we see is that the way the process is set up, many of you may not know this, we had about 1,000 felony trials scheduled this fall. And that means that our staff will have maybe 5, 6, 7 felony trials every Monday. And unfortunately, what can happen is that in the rush of, like, we usually have about 100 felony trials scheduled every Monday. And it's just way too much. And some of what happens is a flurry of communication, things get dismissed, pleas are offered, and it does make it very difficult sometimes for our victim advocates to actually have the time to communicate very well with victims. Makes it very difficult to have really good conversations. So what we are trying to do is do better on our communication. Part of that is looking at our workload to try to figure out how to make sure people have fewer cases, that there's conversations with victims as the case goes on, information from our lawyers being given to victim witness advocates so they can have the conversation. So this is something we're working on to try to improve. Thank you. Okay, we got 2 minutes left and we want to honor your time. I will pick a question I can read. Somebody's writing, I can read. Do we offer victims access to counseling resources like an employee assistance program? And by we, I will say our office, community, what are there resources, therapy, counseling for victims?
Oh, yes.
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 That's why you have community-based organizations like those.
Yes.
That'd be it.
Okay.
Yes.
So can you talk just a little bit about our office's role in that? There are these community resources. How do victims get connected with them?
So as an advocate, I will offer community agencies themselves, but I also have many other counseling services that other victims have reported back that they have found really beneficial. And so I will give, a small list to people and I'll say, hey, here's a few. You may not find one that's right for you on your first try. Try again. If you need more, call me back. Try this place. They might have another referral. And it's one of the first things I usually talk to people about if they've been through something really traumatic, because even though in that very moment they might not be ready, giving them that information so when they get ready and they're there, they have it easily accessible to them.
Okay. Just to wrap up, can each of you just say something briefly about what you would like to see from the criminal legal system in terms of helping victims, people who've been harmed?
As a victim, I really think anything we can do to empower victims and create a more proactive kind of environment. You know, when I think about, there was a program many, many years ago for high school students called There Ought to Be a Law, and, you know, not necessarily duplicating that, but putting that before victims. And I know, you know, I talked about sexual harassment, but criminal vehicular homicide is also an area where there really needs to be a lot of reform. And I did lose my nephew to a car crash, and I was shocked to find out that when my sister she had to sign papers, or she was encouraged to sign papers that said they would not file a civil charge against the person who killed my nephew. And then this was in Wisconsin, and the county there is not pursuing criminal charges. So why is it that, and then she found out later that that was not okay, but why are attorneys telling crash victims that, you know, they need to sign these documents that protect the insurer, basically? So, you know, that there's a lot that needs to be looked at, I think.
We would never do that. That does not happen here.
It does,
Just-
no, but
just so you
attorneys
know.
practicing here could do that, though.
Sure, yeah.
So what's to prevent that? And it was an attorney here. They lived in St. Paul. They
Hmm.
were driving to Wisconsin.
Okay, thank you, and I'm sorry about your loss. Atika?
I think the question that I had is like some of the challenges that we continue to face. One of them was a case around a Sprigo witness.
Oh.
And this is where there's a witness that might have experienced some type of harm. In our case, it was a sexual assault. And then on subsequent cases not involving that victim was continued to call back to witness. And it was years that they were continuing to call back to witness regarding the harmed doer, which brought up additional trauma, which disrupted their lives, and they really felt like they didn't have a lot of information to continue to give. So we're asking for the attorney's office to take a look at that and make sure that that witness is very pertinent to that case before we continue to call them back up. And off the top of my head, I may be wrong, it was like 5 years. We were still calling that witness to testify in those cases. I agree with Jessica, dismantling the perception that the Hennepin County's Victim Service Office is there to make the system work better. They're not there to support the victim and survivor through that process. And I know that that's something that you're working on dismantling, so I would encourage to continue to do that work as well. The cases that have worked the best for me are cases where they have a community advocate and a Hennepin County advocate working together on behalf of that victim and survivor. And I'm sure you guys, I'm leaving some stuff out, so I apologize.
That's why this is the beginning of the conversation. I
Yeah.
did want to say, Artika used a legal term called Sprigo. That's just a Minnesota case that says that prosecutors can use evidence from other assaults even if they haven't been charged or there hasn't been a conviction. So what that means is somebody who reports having been assaulted could be asked or subpoenaed by our office to come and testify in somebody else's case that may involve the same person. But I hear you loud and clear that, and obviously that can be very traumatic.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, I think speaking from a victim of gun violence as well as someone who perpetrated gun violence, I think what I'd like to see is more investment in like truth centers, mediators, diversion programs, culturally competent programming, and responses to the young gun violence. Maybe that looks like supporting organizations that are already doing it, supporting, you know, community members who are doing it already. But I think overall, looking at gun violence different in our communities, our inner city communities, in a way that's, again, not super predatoring our kids and saying, hey, you know, how are these guns getting in here? How are these beefs that start over the internet stuff usually happening? Where's the intervention at, right? Those type of things is what I would like to see more intentionality around.
Thank you.
Personally, I think continuing to build on our relationships with our community partners is essential. Nothing but good can benefit from that. So for me, that's what I'd like to see happen.
Thank you. Can we give our panel a hand?